In early 2025, the long-standing friendship between the United States and Canada faced a major and unexpected test. For decades, the border had symbolized peace, cooperation, and mutual prosperity, but that was about to change. President Donald Trump, dissatisfied with the current trade deals, publicly accused Canada of engaging in unfair business practices that he claimed hurt American workers and industries. In a bold move, he threatened to impose a steep 25% tariff on all Canadian goods entering the United States, saying it was necessary to protect American jobs and industries from what he called Canadian exploitation. Canada saw this as a direct attack on its economy and national pride, sparking outrage and protests across the country. Politicians and citizens alike voiced their anger and concern. Tensions escalated further when Trump made a series of disrespectful remarks about Canada, even going so far as to suggest it could become America's 51st state if it didn't comply. Canadians, fiercely proud of their independence and identity, were deeply offended by these comments, fueling a sense of unity and defiance. The combination of tariff threats and inflammatory rhetoric ignited a crisis that risked millions of livelihoods on both sides of the border, threatening to disrupt trade, jobs, and daily life. Canadian leaders felt compelled to defend their sovereignty and respond decisively, holding emergency meetings and addressing the nation. Years of trust, cooperation, and shared history were suddenly in jeopardy as both sides struggled to find common ground. The U.S. actions forced Canada to consider how to protect its interests and people without escalating the conflict into a full-blown trade war. The stakes were incredibly high. A trade war could disrupt daily life for millions, from factory workers to families shopping for groceries. Both nations now faced a critical crossroads. Would they find a way back to partnership or spiral into deeper conflict and uncertainty? The world watched anxiously as two close allies, once models of cooperation, stood on the brink of a major economic showdown. The crisis had begun, and with neither side willing to back down, the future of North American relations hung in the balance. Canada's response was swift and bold, signaling a new era of assertiveness in its trade policy. British Columbia's Premier, David Eby, announced new tolls on American trucks using the Alaska Highway, a move that immediately captured international attention. This decision directly targeted the only land route connecting the lower 48 states to Alaska, a vital artery for commerce and travel. The tolls would raise costs for transporting essential goods, from food and medical supplies to building materials and fuel, into Alaska, impacting nearly every aspect of daily life in the state. British Columbia's message was clear: if the US imposed tariffs, Canada would defend its own interests, no matter the cost. The province began drafting laws, working late into the night to ensure their response was both legal and effective. Officials prepared to implement the tolls, turning words into action and making it clear that this was not an empty threat. Alaska, heavily reliant on this route for its survival, suddenly found itself caught in the crossfire of a growing trade dispute. The tolls threatened to disrupt supply chains, causing delays and uncertainty for businesses and families alike. Prices for Alaskans began to rise as the cost of everyday goods and groceries crept higher with each passing day. The announcement sent shockwaves through both countries, signaling that Canada would not be intimidated and was ready to stand its ground. The Alaska Highway, once a symbol of cooperation and unity, became the front line of an unexpected economic battle. The conflict was no longer just political. It was about to hit the wallets of ordinary people, changing lives in real and immediate ways. Canada had drawn a line, and the world took notice, watching closely as tensions escalated. The stakes had never been higher for cross-border trade, and the outcome would shape the future of North American relations. For Alaskans, the tolls were a looming disaster. The news spread quickly and anxiety grew as families wondered how they would get by in the weeks ahead. Their state depends on Canadian roads for fresh food, vital equipment, and daily supplies. Every truck that crossed the border carried essentials that kept Alaskan communities running, from bread and milk to fuel and medicine. The new fees threatened to make everything more expensive, from groceries to oil industry parts. Even basic items could become luxuries, and businesses braced for higher costs that would be passed on to everyone. Business owners and truckers feared for their livelihoods as costs soared. Many worried that some companies might not survive if the situation dragged on and jobs could be lost. The sense of isolation grew. Alaska's unique geography made it vulnerable to decisions made far away. With no alternative routes, the state felt more cut off than ever before. Long-standing ties with Canadian neighbors in British Columbia and the Yukon were suddenly strained. Decades of cooperation and friendship seemed at risk, replaced by uncertainty and frustration. The tolls didn't just disrupt trade, they fractured the sense of community along the border. Families and friends who lived on both sides now faced new barriers. Alaska's leaders, including Governor Mike Dunleavy, pleaded for a solution, hoping to avoid being collateral damage in a larger dispute. They knew the stakes were high for every resident. They reached out to both US and Canadian officials, desperate to keep the lifeline open. Diplomatic channels buzzed with urgent messages and calls for compromise. The crisis exposed just how dependent Alaska was on goodwill from Canada. The state's fate now rested on negotiations far beyond its borders. Without open roads, Alaska's connection to the rest of the US was in jeopardy. The threat of isolation was no longer just theoretical, it was real and immediate. The state faced an uncertain future, caught in a conflict it never wanted. For Alaskans, the question now was how long they could hold on and what the next day would bring. President Trump's response to Canada's tolls was immediate and fierce. He condemned the move, calling Canadian leaders weak and threatening even higher tariffs. His tough rhetoric was meant to intimidate, but it only hardened Canada's resolve. The dispute quickly became personal, with national pride on the line. Trump's supporters cheered his stance, but many Americans worried about the fallout. Instead of backing down, Canadian leaders and the public united against what they saw as bullying. The conflict escalated from a trade disagreement to a test of sovereignty and dignity. Trump's threats failed to divide Canada. Instead, they brought the country together. The risk of a full-blown trade war loomed larger than ever. The world watched as tensions reached a boiling point. British Columbia's bold actions sparked a wave of unity across Canada. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's government announced retaliatory tariffs on American goods. Ontario imposed a 25% surcharge on electricity exports to the US, targeting states dependent on Canadian power. The Yukon stopped buying American products for government use, showing solidarity with the national response. Even smaller territories joined in, making it clear that all of Canada stood together. Leaders emphasized that these measures weren't aimed at ordinary Americans, but at defending Canadian sovereignty. The United Front sent a powerful message. Canada would not be bullied or divided. From coast to coast, provinces and territories coordinated their actions. Canada's response was strategic, measured, and resolute. While Washington escalated the conflict, Alaska took a different path. The Alaska House of Representatives passed a resolution opposing Trump's tariffs and recognizing Canada's sovereignty. Alaskan leaders understood that cooperation with Canada was essential for their state's survival. They invited Yukon Premier Ranch Pillai to address their legislature, fostering dialogue and understanding. Pillai explained Canada's position and emphasized the long history of cross-border friendship. These gestures showed that not all Americans supported the president's approach. Alaskan lawmakers became peacemakers, advocating for diplomacy over confrontation. Their actions reassured Canadians that bridges could still be built even in a crisis. The hope for a peaceful solution grew stronger. Alaska's outreach proved that local leadership could make a difference. The path to resolution began with respect and open communication. The trade dispute hit ordinary people hardest. Truck drivers faced uncertainty and feared job losses as tolls threatened their livelihoods. Small businesses on both sides of the border worried about rising costs and fewer customers. Alaskan grocery stores braced for higher prices. Canadian roadside businesses feared losing vital traffic. The crisis strained the close-knit communities along the border, turning friends into reluctant adversaries. Generations of cross-border cooperation were suddenly at risk. Decisions made in distant capitals disrupted daily life in remote towns. The emotional toll was as real as the economic one, eroding trust and security. Everyone hoped for a quick resolution to restore normalcy. The lesson was clear. International politics can touch even the smallest communities. The 2025 crisis underscored the vital importance of US-Canada trade. Billions in goods cross the border daily, supporting millions of jobs in both countries. Alaska's economy in particular is deeply intertwined with Canada's. Disruptions threatened everything from food supplies to local businesses. The Alaska Highway, once a symbol of partnership, became a reminder of how fragile these connections can be. The threat of tolls and tariffs made everyone realize how much they depended on open borders. Cooperation, not conflict, is the foundation of prosperity for both nations. When trade flows, both countries thrive. When it's blocked, everyone suffers. The crisis forced people to appreciate the value of partnership. Lawmakers and business owners on both sides pushed for peace, knowing their futures were linked. The lesson was simple. Good relations are priceless. The crisis was a wake-up call to protect what matters most. In the end, cooler heads prevailed. The strong reactions on both sides highlighted what was at stake, pushing leaders to seek compromise. Alaskan and Canadian officials worked together, lowering tensions and reopening dialogue. The crisis began with threats, but ended with a renewed commitment to cooperation. Both countries recognized their mutual dependence. Alaska needed Canada's roads, and Canada needed access to US markets. The proposed tolls and tariffs were set aside in favor of negotiation. Trust was slowly rebuilt, and the spirit of partnership returned. The episode served as a powerful lesson. Even close allies must work to maintain their relationship. Ordinary people and local leaders played a crucial role in finding peace. The memory of the crisis remains, reminding both nations never to take their friendship for granted. With care and respect, the US-Canada partnership proved resilient enough to weather even the toughest storms.